Leeds, Everton, and Burnley have abandoned PFM blueprint for inexperience in dugout. Everton, Leeds, and Burnley all sacked managers with years of experience in favor of the untried this season, but all three remain in danger of relegation. And then there was one. Watford drifted out of the Premier League after they were swatted aside by Crystal Palace. For the second time this season, a relegation place was taken by a club who didn't have anything like a great escape in their locker. With them and Norwich City now having succumbed to something that had looked increasingly inevitable as the season wore on, there is one place left in the Championship and three clubs fighting for their lives to avoid it. Just one game separates Everton, Leeds United and Burnley. Two of them have 3 games left, while Everton have a game in hand on the other 2. And with Burnley and Everton now within a couple of goals of each other on goal difference, Leeds is substantially worse. As bad as the other two put together, things couldn't be much tighter. Everton have taken 10 points from the 5 games played since a 3-2 defeat at Burnley seemed to bang the final nail into the coffin of their 68 consecutive years of top-flight football. For Leeds United, relegation would mark the end of a dream period during which the club soared back to the top flight for the first time in 16 years under a manager who connected with the supporters in a way that few managers ever manage. Burnley's would bring to an end 6 years building a club's identity through fighting against the odds and on the most public stage possible. But although these 3 clubs have all been on very different trajectories this season, they have all made one decision which looks very similar. At the start of this season, Everton, Leeds, and Burnley were managed by Rafa Benitez, Marcelo Bielsa and Sean Dyche, 3 managers who between them had picked up around 22 years of experience of managing in the Premier League. These 3 clubs have all now taken varying steps into the unknown in replacing these wizened old pros. The current incumbents in those 3 positions, Frank Lampard, Jesse Marsch and Mike Jackson, have 2 years and 3 months between them, and of that, 10 months have been claimed this season. In other words, all 3 of the clubs fighting to avoid that final relegation place have done something fairly unusual. When faced with the real possibility of relegation from the Premier League, with all the upheaval and the vast financial costs that come with it, they've sacked very experienced managers and replaced them with managers with next to no experience whatsoever. None of the 3 managers currently engaged in this 3-way fight have been involved in a Premier League relegation fight before. Even Frank Lampard, whose 2 seasons divided between Chelsea and Everton makes up almost all of their combined Premier League experience, has spent 3/4 of his time there in the top half of the table. Of course, Premier League experience isn't necessary in terms of being successful. Pep Guardiola, Jurgen Klopp, Jose Mourinho and Alex Ferguson all succeeded in their first position in the English top flight, even if Ferguson took a few years to get to the top. But it is striking that all 3 of these clubs should have turned to thinking outside the box when it came to making a very important decision that could have very serious ramifications. If nothing else, these appointments all being made in one season could be interpreted as the end of the years of routinely calling for Big Sam to be brought in to turn things around when the trapdoor is starting to slide open. It has long been the case that the proper football man's name would start to be thrown around whenever a club was within 10 points of the relegation places, but perhaps the trend of hiring people from this endlessly circling merry-go-round of managers who will dig you out of a hole is finally coming to an end. But moving away from this orthodoxy isn't guaranteed to work. Taking these 3 managers as examples, we might conclude that only Jackson has been anything like successful in turning his team's fortunes around, and he's only had 5 games. Everton were 16th in the Premier League and 6 points above the relegation places when they hired Frank Lampard in January. They're still 16th and 1 point above them now. Leeds were 16th in the Premier League when they hired Jesse Marsch at the end of February. They're 17th and above the relegation places on goal difference only now. Burnley were 18th in the Premier League and 4 points adrift of 17th when they replaced Dyche with Mike Jackson. They're still 17th, but now only on goal difference. Only Jackson has done anything like improve his team's performance, and he's only had 5 matches, so it may be a little early to tell whether he's the next Harry Potts or Jimmy Adamson. These 3 clubs have all arrived at this position by different routes. Everton have been building themselves a bonfire to fall upon for the last few years, overspending in the belief that success would eventually clear those debts. Their problems began way before the sudden departure of main sponsor Alisher Usmanov earlier this year. Leeds have been run ragged by the inevitable slowing of post-promotion momentum and horrendous injuries, colliding with a punishing schedule and a failure to flesh out the squad when they had the chance. Burnley have been defying gravitational pull for some years and have been here before. But the fact that they got to this stage of the season having exchanged age for new ideas is interesting. Frank Lampard has never really been involved in a relegation battle before, as a player or manager. The nearest he ever came was the 2001 season at West Ham, when a poor start left them in the relegation places for the first couple of months of the season before they finished in 15th, 8 points above the relegation places. Jesse Marsch has spent the overwhelming majority of his career in MLS, where there is no promotion and relegation, with his only European experience coming near the top of tables at RB Salzburg and Leipzig. Mike Jackson is better qualified, not only from a lengthy playing career in the Football League, but also from one of his previous spells in management. In 2014, he took Shrewsbury Town from League One to League Two during a brief spell there on a rolling contract which was not extended beyond the end of the season. And while some may scratch their heads at the fact that somebody with that history could now be in a similar situation in the Premier League, it should also be added that perhaps this experience will give him an advantage in the nerve-wracking days to come. He's been here before, the other two haven't. A fairly rancid home defeat by Aston Villa notwithstanding, Burnley's improvement since Jackson took over has been highly promising. The decision to sack Sean Dyche felt at the time like a desperate roll of the dice by the club's owners, but while one of the dice is still spinning, the other has landed on a 6. Relegation costs a minimum of £100 million, and that figure can rise substantially once an axe has been taken to the value of commercial deals. Players may be at risk of not having their contracts extended or of large pay cuts from relegation clauses in their contracts. Staff may be at risk of redundancy. Managers who fail are at very high risk of losing their jobs, and supporters with all the insecurities that come with it, of the possibility of not coming back up, or perhaps even of doing a Leeds. Everton, Leeds and Burnley have arrived at these near-identical points by very different means, but have one thing in common: they all stepped outside football's comfort zone to make their managerial changes this season. But only 2 of these appointments can end it deemed anything like a success, and the third will have to carry a very heavy cost not only for their clubs, but also quite possibly for themselves too.